for northern and western parts of the country as we start off Tuesday, particularly North Wales, North West England, some heavy bursts during the morning. Into the afternoon, the rain tends to ease. It stays cloudy and damp across Wales and the west of England. But for Scotland and Northern Ireland, brighter skies, and here 23, 24, 25 Celsius possible in places with that sunny shine. And towards the southeast, it stays dry and it's going to feel humid, although breezy, with highs of 29 or 30 Celsius. Into the evening, and outbreaks of rain continue across northern and western parts of the country, mostly light, showery stuff, and again it stays dry towards the southeast as well as parts of northern England and eastern Scotland. But it's another mild night with a keen breeze from the southwest and temperatures in places no lower than 19 Celsius. So we start off Wednesday with a lot of cloud cover, some heavier rain for a time, perhaps around the Bristol Channel area. That moves through, and it looks like it's going to be replaced by bright spells and showers for the rest of the week. The showers mostly affecting northern areas, largely dry to the south, and cooling off a little bit.
Join me, Gloria De Piero, Monday to Thursday at noon for The Briefing. We go to the parts of Parliament that you won't see elsewhere. Plus, there's exclusive interviews with MPs from all parties.
But quite often, they paper over the real truth. Why does a working class lad like you join the Tories?
That's a good question.
Don't miss it, Monday to Thursdays at noon on GB News.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for The Briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, The Briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Well, hi there, welcome to Brazier. Some fast-paced news from 4 until 6. Coming up for you in the next hour. Today was D-Day for Tory members. The first time they've been able to vote for the person they want to be Prime Minister. For those who haven't made up their minds, the second of a dozen hustings starts this evening, this one in Exeter. Today, both Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss announced two major policy pledges. Sunak says he'll cut the basic rate of income tax from 20 to 16% by the end of the next Parliament if he becomes Prime Minister. Truss has vowed to unleash British farming to shore up food security with a pledge to slash red tape and extend a seasonal workers scheme. Also, a rallying call from the Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police as he urges officers to stop wasting time investigating online spats as hate incidents and tackle mainstream crime instead. Is he onto something? We think he is. We'll discuss Stephen Watson's comments with a former police officer who's had hand experience of being investigated for his social media posts. And our debate this hour will ask, should we fine people who miss their NHS appointments? Rishi Sunak says he would do, introducing a £10 fine for patients who repeatedly miss GP or hospital appointments. Is the Tory leadership hopeful onto something? With me for the next 2 hours, the journalist and author Ella Whelan. But first, the latest news headlines with Polly.
Colin, thank you. Good afternoon. And the top story today. Fans have gathered at Trafalgar Square in London to celebrate the Lionesses' historic Euro 2022 women's football win. That's England's first major championship win since the 1966 World Cup, beating Germany 2-1 in extra time last night. And a record crowd of over 87,000 people were at Wembley Stadium last night to watch in person, whilst 17.5 million people tuned in on TV at home. The Minister for Sport, Nigel Huddleston, believes the UK has a great chance of hosting the Women's World Cup in 2027.
I can't speak on behalf of the Chancellor, but I think we could have a very compelling case. And of course, you know, we're bidding already. We've got a team in place to bid for the 2028 Euros and actually a whole host of other events later on this year as well. We've got the Rugby League World Cup, we've got international gymnastics, you know, so, and we're currently hosting, as I said, the Commonwealth Games. So we punch above our weight in major international sporting events, but we can do even more.
Well, in other news today, political leaders and dignitaries gathered in Lisbon, County Antrim this morning for the funeral of Lord David Trimble, the former Ulster Unionist Party leader and Nobel Peace Prize winner, died last week at the age of 77 following an illness. Lord Trimble played a key role in forging the 1998 Good Friday Agreement that ended decades of conflict in Northern Ireland. A 22-year-old man has appeared in Lincoln Crown Court charged of murdering 9-year-old Lilia Valutite. She was found stabbed on the street in Boston in Lincolnshire on Thursday. Lithuanian national Davidas Skebas was arrested after the public responded to CCTV images that were released to help trace him. He's going to be remanded in custody until a plea hearing in September. And a virtual court hearing is underway to hear the life support treatment case of Archie Battersbee. The government referred the case back to the courts for urgent consideration following an intervention by the UN. 12-year-old Archie is in a coma after suffering brain damage. Barts Health NHS Trust has said his treatment would end this afternoon after a High Court ruled it was in his best interests. Politics and ballots for Conservative Party members to vote in the leadership contest will start arriving today. Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss going head-to-head tonight in a hustings in Exeter as they head into a crucial week in the Tory leadership race. Both leadership candidates have made further policy announcements in a bid to shore up their support. Liz Truss, for her part, has vowed to remove EU regulations and red tape in an effort to improve the nation's food security. The Foreign Secretary also promised to tackle staff shortages in farming, partly caused by post-Brexit restrictions, with a short-term expansion to the seasonal workers scheme. And Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, Therese Coffey, is backing Truss's ideas.
Well, I think it shows that colleagues recognise that Liz is ready to lead, is trusted to deliver and will get on with the job from day one. She's been consistent in her approach on reducing taxes for families and for businesses, and I think it's important that we get on with that, including the other policies she's announced today.
Meanwhile, Rishi Sunak has committed to taking 4 pence off income tax within 7 years if he becomes Prime Minister. The former Chancellor said he has a plan to cut the basic rate from 20 pence in the pound to 16 pence.
Now that bills are going to be higher than we thought, it's right that we go further. And as Prime Minister, what I want to do is cut VAT on energy bills to provide a little bit of extra help for people over the autumn and winter. But today I've been setting out my radical vision for where I want to take the economy after we get inflation under control. I want to cut income tax by 20%. That's one of the most far-reaching cuts to income tax that we've seen.
International news, and Ukraine's infrastructure minister says a ship carrying grain has now left the port of Odessa for Lebanon under a safe passage agreement. It's the first vessel to depart as part of a deal to unblock Ukraine's Black Sea ports. It's been made possible after Turkey and the United Nations came to a grain and fertiliser export agreement between Russia and Ukraine last month. Meanwhile, Russia has banned entry to 39 UK officials, including the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer and the former Prime Minister David Cameron. Waitrose is set to follow Marks & Spencer's and Tesco by removing best before dates on nearly 500 fresh food products. It's in an effort to reduce food waste. From September, Waitrose is going to scrap dates on packaged fruit and vegetables to encourage shoppers to decide for themselves when food is past its best. That's the headlines. You're with GB News. More news as it happens. Now back to Colin.
Coming up to 8 minutes past 4. Well, today, members of the Conservative Party, they can start voting. Some of them will have already voted for who they want as their next party leader and our next Prime Minister. Tonight, we think around about 7 o'clock, Liz Truss, Rishi Sunak will face each other and an audience of party members in Exeter. This the second of a dozen scheduled hustings. Well, ahead of the event, the former Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, has announced plans to cut the basic rate of income tax by 4p. Goodness me, if he becomes Prime Minister, that would see the rate drop from 20 to 16%. Earlier today, he spoke to Conservative Party members in Dorset, where he outlined some of those plans.
Now that bills are going to be higher than we thought, it's right that we go further. And as Prime Minister, what I want to do is cut VAT on energy bills to provide a little bit of extra help for people over the autumn and winter. I want to cut income tax by 20%. That's one of the most far-reaching cuts to income tax that we've seen. We'll do that responsibly over time, continuing to reduce our borrowing, and we'll do it by growing the economy, taking advantage of our Brexit freedoms, and getting our businesses to invest more and innovate more through the tax reforms that I'm going to put in place.
Well, following all this very closely has been for weeks our political correspondent Tom Harwood, who's here in the studio. 4p in a pound. I mean, it's fairy tale economics, isn't it? I mean, I'm all in favour. Let's cut taxes. Brilliant. But really?
Well, reading the small print on this policy, it's not 4p in the pound immediately. Indeed, this policy takes 7 years to roll out. And this is one of the sticks with which Rishi Sunak is being beaten by Liz Truss. Her campaign says that people don't need tax cuts in 7 years' time. They need tax cuts now. But also simultaneously saying that this is a bit of a U-turn from Rishi Sunak. Yes, it may well be in 7 years' time, but we don't know what the level of inflation will be in 7 years' time. And the whole mantra of Rishi Sunak through the course of this campaign has been he would think it's irresponsible. He even used the word immoral last week to cut tax until inflation was under control. So to some extent, this does look like a little bit of desperation from Rishi Sunak. We know he's 24 points behind in the latest poll, although, bit of a caveat, that poll was over a week ago now. We haven't seen a poll since then, although I suppose one of the arguments that we haven't is things might not have moved. You might reason that both campaigns have been running private polls, and if there was one that was extra brilliant for them, they'd want to release that pretty sharpish. So we can safely assume, looking at the cabinet endorsements, looking at the way things have been moving, all of the members of the Scottish Parliament today who've endorsed Liz Truss. Equally, the cabinet ministers and former leadership contenders, everyone from Brandon Lewis, the Chancellor, Nadhim Zahawi, and indeed the former leadership contender Tom Tugendhat, all endorsing Liz Truss over the weekend. It looks like the momentum is still firmly in the Truss camp.
Yeah, now, Tom, I'm finding this all slightly depressing because I was hoping the Conservative Party membership race would sustain us through the doldrums and the dog days of August, but it sounds like possibly like, given that voting begins today, online voting starts today. They've got, as you explained to me during the commercial break, they've got their voting packs, they can send off their ballots. And if we get a sense within the next few days that she's not just won it by a bit, she's won it by a landslide, then the next few weeks actually become pretty pointless.
I think one of the reasons why we're seeing these last-ditch policy announcements now is because we're all expecting these votes to majoritarily take place this week and next week. So yes, the latter half of August will likely be a bit more of a lull, fewer announcements, no big debates. In fact, one of these clues as to things looking like they're more sewn up than they were before is that the debate that was going to take place on Thursday, the Sky News debate, is now no longer a debate. It is two separate interviews and audience questions. So instead of the two candidates going head-to-head, they will now go sequentially in that event on Thursday. So not quite the head-to-head it had been advertised as. Potentially this is because people see it, perhaps even the Liz Truss campaign seeing it as, you know what, we're so far ahead, why take any more risks? That could well be the case, although there are these 12 hustings taking place, organised by the Conservative Party. We've already had one. The second one is today. And after that, of course, 10 more, one in every region of the United Kingdom. So those will at least keep the conversation going, even if what is being said isn't very new. One further point today, of course, we're seeing this hustings down in Exeter, the southwest regional hustings. We've been hearing about agricultural policy from both of
But don't steal my thunder. That's my next item. I'm going to tell them about that.
I did want to mention one thing. A pretty extraordinary attack from Rishi Sunak against Liz Truss. Liz Truss announced a seasonal visa for people to come over, pick fruit and the like, something that the farmers' unions had been wanting to see. Rishi Sunak attacking Liz Truss, saying that this is a Remainer policy, saying that she's blaming Brexit for some of the labour shortages problems in the agricultural sector, and saying that her true Remainer colours are starting to show. A quote from the Rishi Sunak campaign. Now,
wasn't it as much to do with lockdown? Wasn't it as much to do with lockdown?
Arguably, particularly in the service sector, we've seen a lot of people leave the labour force. That's true. Then I suppose that is the Rishi Sunak argument, that Liz Truss offering these more visas is seeing this as more of a Brexit issue. But when I put that claim and that attack to the Liz Truss campaign a little bit earlier today, a source from there simply sent me an animated GIF on WhatsApp of a car wheeling around on a slippery road, sliding from side to side, implying that they're not too worried about this attack from Rishi Sunak.
Fantastic. Tom, thanks very much indeed. Ella Wheeler, no Tory you. Is there any part of this process that you're enjoying? I mean, you know, ideas being ventilated and interrogated, people turning up to hustings, you'd go for that stuff, wouldn't you?
Enjoyment, perhaps not. But, you know, I think everybody is invested in this because at the end of the day, it will be our next Prime Minister, and that's a very serious thing to contend with. It does feel a little bit like in the last week, the two candidates have kind of got a big hat of policies and they've shut their eyes and dipped their hand and picked out whatever comes to hand. And, you know, I think from the sort of more ridiculous ones to actually more serious ones, like we've just been talking about, 4p, and, you know, particularly in relation to farming policies, which might seem like a small part of British society, but as we know, food security is becoming a fundamental question for the future. Feeling like things are being done off the kind of, you know, written on the back of a fag packet and sort of made up in order to attack another campaigner, another contestant, is making me feel a little nervous about the seriousness of politics.
OK. You mentioned farming, Ella. We'll come on to that in just a second. Tom will say thanks very much indeed for coming in as well. Thanks a lot. Yes, Rishi Sunak's challenger, Liz Truss, announcing her own major policy today, promising to, quote, unleash British farming as she vowed to remove what she calls onerous EU regulations on farmers. Do we still have them? Apparently we must have, in a bid to improve the UK's food security. Foreign Secretary has said that if she becomes Prime Minister, frankly, on current form, it looks likely, doesn't it, she would tackle labour shortages with a short-term expansion to the seasonal workers scheme. The programme was originally launched in 2019. It allowed 40,000 overseas workers to enter the UK for seasonal roles in the horticulture and poultry sectors in particular. Let's turn to Andrew Ward, who's a Lincolnshire arable farmer. Andrew, welcome to you. I mean, I'm guessing you'll be pleased to see a senior politician, one likely on current form to become next Prime Minister, taking agriculture seriously.
Well, yeah, hello, good afternoon, Colin. Good to see you again. I think really all I'd say really from this is whoever we get, we want somebody that actually delivers what they say they're going to deliver. We've had enough of warm words, and Liz Truss, I forget the exact terminology, but I think she said we're going to, or she would unleash something to do with food and production and farming. Well, it's all very well having all these fancy phrases. We need actually action, and we need actually things to happen that they say they're going to do. I mean, Liz Truss sold us down the Murray River with the Australian trade deal, and that should have gone before the TAC to be discussed and ratified. It didn't. And there's lots of things happening with these trade deals, lots of things happening in agricultural foreign policy at the minute that is really damaging to UK agriculture. And we just want honesty here. And if they say they're going to do something, we want that actually to happen.
Andrew, just on that Australia trade deal, I mean, I'm going to be talking to Jamie Blackett in an hour or so. He farms. He's now a dairy farmer. He's moved into dairy, which will strike some people as odd, given how much money you make for your milk and stuff. But I recently read his book. A lot of it's spent talking about farming, and he says that the Australia trade deal, brokered by Liz Truss, actually may end up being a good thing for farmers if we can compete on equal terms, if it opens up markets, if it becomes a way of opening markets like China in particular to our beef farmers and our sheep farmers, for instance.
Well, yeah, that might be, but I think I don't know whether that's right or not yet. I think we're not far enough down the line to know whether that's true or not. But we have to go back to our environmental and welfare standards, our food production standards here. And all we really want is for those not to be undermined anywhere in the world on imports. It's as simple as that. And at the minute, they are vastly undermined. And when you look at food security as well, we can't rely on imports anymore. We are only 60% self-sufficient in food, and that's dropping at an alarming rate. And we need to be more self-sufficient to promote homegrown food, not signing trade deals with foreign countries that undermines our own very high produced food.
Andrew, we've got some breaking news I want to go to. Just in a word, how's the harvest going?
We are only 2 days in. I've got 2 days of oats we've done. I've got a field of oats here behind me that's got some more. We've got a few more of those to go. But we just want some fine weather, Colin. Fine, settled weather. So please keep the rain away.
Good luck and thank you. Andrew Ward there. That breaking news, an application to delay switching off the life support of 12-year-old Archie Battersbee has failed. The Court of Appeal has given until midday tomorrow, after which staff at the Royal London Hospital will be able to end his life-sustaining treatment. The 12-year-old has been in a coma since April. Let's go to our reporter, Alice Porter, who's been following this case. Alice.
Hi there. Yes, Sir Andrew McFarlane, who's the most senior family court judge in England and Wales, he has not accepted the application on behalf of Archie Battersbee and said he saw no reason to continue him on life support, but did allow a delay until midday tomorrow. His life support machine was meant to be switched off this afternoon, but because of this case going to the Court of Appeal, this was ongoing today. And this very much all happened in the last 24 hours because the family submitted a request through the United Nations to their Committee for the Rights of People with Disabilities. They in turn had put a request through to the government asking for them not to switch off his life support machine until they had examined the case. But Sir Andrew McFarlane said that no matter what the United Nations say in this, and we do have a number of treaties and conventions that we share with the United Nations when it comes to the rights of people with disabilities, these are not aspects of domestic law. And I think that was the really crucial point, that unincorporated international treaty is not UK law. It's not ratified by Parliament. Yes, we may have conventions with the United Nations, but they are not UK law. And this is a case that, as we've spoken to you a number of times on GB News, this has gone to the High Court twice. This has been seen by multiple judges, including Sir Andrew McFarlane, who was the one making this judgment today. So from his point of view, he said he saw no reason to delay this any further, but it will be taking place tomorrow midday, which of course is absolutely devastating for the family. This accident for Archie Battersbee took place, from their point of view, only a few months ago, and this entire process for them has been entirely rushed. And Holly Dance, the mother of Archie Battersbee, when I've spoken to her, she said she wants her son to die in a way that is, quotes, natural, i.e. not having the ventilator removed. But that's very much not what the hospital want to do, and something that was was said by Sir Andrew McFarlane in the Court of Appeal today is the concern about the state in which Archie Battersbee is in currently. He referred to him being malnourished, that he's having digestive problems, and echoed the words of Mr. Justice Hayden that in fact keeping him on a life support machine was protracting his death rather than prolonging his life. And therefore, as the highest court in the UK have said that it is in Archie's best interest to have his life support machine removed, therefore that is what should take place tomorrow, which of course will be devastating for the family who have taken this legal battle as far as they could possibly go. But sadly, it looks like they have exhausted all possible avenues.
Alice Porter, thanks very much indeed. Ella Whelan, my studio guest today to reflect on this story and all the stories we're covering today. This is a particularly sensitive, tragic story, that goes without saying. We've seen it again and again, haven't we? Parents, for entirely understandable reasons, throwing themselves on the mercy of the courts, if I can put it that way. It felt odd when the UN got involved, and that seems to have been swatted away. But you can understand why families will go to any legal lengths to prolong the life of their child, can't you?
On the one hand, it's the strongest display of parental love you can imagine, which is never, ever giving up, and it's every parent's nightmare. But we've seen, you mentioned there have been previous cases, I'm thinking of Charlie Gard in 2017, where you have this unfortunate conflict between parents, where parents end up not trusting hospital staff, and you have to ask why those situations are happening and what's going on with the breakdown in relationship between doctors and nurses and parents who, most of us would kind of understand that, there shouldn't be animosity between those two groups, particularly in cases where there's such tragic cases like Archie's. But, I'm thinking back to when there were protests outside Great Ormond Street with Charlie's Army protests, and it ended up causing a real friction that gets exacerbated by court cases that is very unhelpful. It's hard to see, it's hard to kind of give a definitive answer on this because it's so painful for the parents. But at the end of the day, I think, we have to trust that hospitals know best.
Yeah. Ella, thanks very much. Let's change tack. The England women's national football team celebrated in front of thousands of fans in Trafalgar Square today after winning the European Championships with a 2-1 win over Germany last night. 17.6 million people tuned in to watch the game. There was a turnout of 87,000 at Wembley, set a UEFA attendance record. Our GB News reporter Paul Hawkins has been in Trafalgar Square today. Paul.
Yeah, hi Colin. Yeah, 17 million watching on TV. 87,000 at that game last night, as you say. 7,000 fans here today. The Lionesses arrived around about 12:30. They then waited backstage behind me, which they're just taking down now. By the way, everyone's filed away, but the Lionesses were on stage, but backstage, and the anticipation was building. They were singing Sweet Caroline, loads of flag waving. It was a fantastic atmosphere, and then eventually the Lionesses came out and pretty much most of them were speaking on stage, made speeches, also singing Sweet Caroline back to the crowd. It was a bit like watching karaoke. There was Beth Mead, the player of the tournament, the top scorer. We also heard from last night's goal scorers, Chloe Kelly and Ella Toone. So, yeah, everyone on stage as well. Serena Wiegmann as well, the manager, talking about the fact that these players weren't just fantastic players, they're also great human beings as well. So that real connection between the manager and the players that has helped propel them to such a historic victory, and the crowd here were absolutely loving it. Have a listen to what they told us after.
Brilliant, we're so happy we got here. We're in London for 3 days and we got in, amazing.
And the atmosphere here is unreal. So we would have never have had this a few years ago.
Yeah.
And then just look at the chaos now, what it's causing. Everyone's come together to support our women, and what a good job they've done.
Did you ever see something like this with the women's football team?
No.
No?
No.
No?
No, this is the biggest stage they've ever had, and I'm just hoping, from what I've been hearing from Ian Wright,
yeah,
I'm just hoping that they make the tickets and the matches more accessible to the youngsters.
How have you found this?
Amazing, and they deserve the cup.
Yeah, who have you enjoyed watching the most? Who's your favourite player?
Russo, Alicia Russo.
Was it that back heel?
Yeah.
It was good, wasn't it?
It was amazing.
Yeah.
And it went through her legs, it went through the goalkeeper's legs as well.
Yeah, yeah. And do you play it yourself?
I'm about to play in September for Bromley.
For the first time? Do you want to play now because you've watched this England women's team?
Yeah.
Have you enjoyed watching the tournament?
Yes.
Yeah?
A lot.
Yeah, who's been your favourite player?
Ellen White.
Yeah. Really?
Yeah.
Were they your favourite players before the tournament, or has watching the tournament made?
Always they have, because Beth Mead is such fast paced. She's a really good shooter, and I play in the same position as her.
All right. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're playing already. Do you play as well?
No.
But would you like to play?
Yeah.
So for the team now, they're looking ahead to World Cup qualification for next year in New Zealand and Australia. Also some talk about whether England are going to bid to host the 2027 World Cup. But in the meantime, the immediate priority now will be to build on this legacy, and that means making it more possible for girls when they go to their headmaster at school and say, look, I want to play football now, making it more possible for them. 44% of secondary schools give boys an education in football as much as the girls. That leaves 56% of schools who still aren't catering for girls when it comes to football. So there's some work to do for schools, some work to do for grassroots clubs, and also for the footballing authorities.
Paul, thanks very much indeed. Paul Hawkins there in Trafalgar Square. Ella, just a note on the technique of interviewing young children there. Paul's got it off to a fine art. You need to, but also they can clam up pretty easily. He kept them going. Brilliant. What a skill.
Good, yes.
What a skill. Coming up, we have the Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police, who's calling on police forces to stop wasting time by investigating things like Twitter posts because people are offended. He wants them to get back to tackling mainstream crime. He's making a name for himself. This is Stephen Watson. We'll discuss that next, but first, the weather.
Hi there, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. Dry and bright out there for many of us this afternoon, but it is going to turn cloudy with rain for many, especially northern and central areas overnight. And it will stay, once again, driest towards the south. At the moment, an area of high pressure is stretching towards the UK from the southwest, but a number of weather fronts are coming in over the top of that high. They are now starting to bring rain to Northern Ireland, Western Scotland, and overnight we'll see that rain spread into the rest of Scotland, Northern England, parts of North and West Wales as well. Further south you are, the more that rain will be on and off and lighter. The far south and southeast tending to stay dry with some clear spells, but elsewhere a lot of cloud cover, increasingly breezy, spells of rain and mild, 17 or 18 Celsius by dawn in many places. The rain, though, will be heavy at times for northern and western parts of the country as we start off Tuesday, particularly North Wales, North West England, some heavy bursts during the morning. Into the afternoon, the rain tends to ease. It stays cloudy and damp across Wales and the west of England. But for Scotland and Northern Ireland, brighter skies, and here 23, 24, 25 Celsius possible in places with that sunny shine. And towards the southeast, it stays dry and it's going to feel humid, although breezy, with highs of 29 or 30 Celsius. Into the evening, and outbreaks of rain continue across northern and western parts of the country, mostly light, showery stuff, and again it stays dry towards the southeast, as well as parts of northern England and eastern Scotland. But it's another mild night with a keen breeze from the southwest and temperatures in places no lower than 19 Celsius. So we start off Wednesday with a lot of cloud cover, some heavier rain for a time, perhaps around the Bristol Channel area. That moves through, and it looks like it's going to be replaced by bright spells and showers for the rest of the week. The showers mostly affecting northern areas, largely dry to the south, and cooling off a little bit.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GBNews.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
The 4:30 headlines on GB News. An application to delay switching off Archie Battersbee's life support treatment has failed. The Court of Appeal has given until midday tomorrow, after which the Royal London Hospital will be able to end the 12-year-old's care. He's been in a coma since April. The government referred the case back to the courts for urgent consideration following an intervention by the UN. Bart's Health NHS Trust had said his treatment would end this afternoon after a High Court ruled it was in Archie's best interests. Political leaders and dignitaries have gathered in Lisbon, County Antrim, for the funeral of Lord David Trimble. The former Ulster Unionist Party leader and Nobel Peace Prize winner died last week at the age of 77 following an illness. Lord Trimble played a key role in forging the 1998 Good Friday Agreement that ended decades of conflict in Northern Ireland. And fans have been gathering at Trafalgar Square in London for the Lionesses' historic Euro 2022 win last night. It's England's first major football championship win since the 1966 World Cup, beating Germany 2-1 in extra time last night. A record crowd of over 87,000 people went to Wembley Stadium itself to watch, and 17.5 million people tuned in at home. The Minister for Sport, Nigel Huddleston, believes the UK has a great chance of hosting the Women's World Cup in 2027.
Speak on behalf of the Chancellor, but I think we could have a very compelling case. And of course, you know, we're bidding already. We've got a team in place to bid for the 2028 Euros and actually a whole host of other events later on this year as well. We've got the Rugby League World Cup, we've got international gymnastics, you know, so, and we're currently hosting, as I said, the Commonwealth Games. So we punch above our weight in major international sporting events, but we can do even more.
And Ukraine says the first ship carrying grain has left the seaport of Odessa as part of a deal to unblock Ukraine's Black Sea ports. It was made possible after Turkey and the United Nations came to a grain and fertiliser export agreement between Russia and Ukraine last month. Meanwhile, Russia has banned entry to 39 officials from the UK, including the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer and the former Prime Minister David Cameron. You're up to date on TV, online and on your radio via DAB+. You're with GB News, and now it's back to Brazier.
Well, now, GB News has been told that the number of people pulled from small boats in the English Channel today is likely to have surpassed this year's record. It's understood more than 600 people have been brought ashore in Kent after around a dozen small boats were intercepted by the Border Force, as well as lifeboats and the Royal Navy throughout the course of the day. Our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, has more.
At the entrance to Ramsgate Harbour, two Border Force vessels, the catamarans Typhoon and Volunteer, have arrived together to unload dozens of people pulled from small boats in the middle of the Channel. Since first light, Border Force, lifeboats and the Royal Navy have been responding to multiple reports of small boats crossing into UK waters. For the past week, Border Force has been using Ramsgate as an alternative landing spot for Channel migrants because of the traffic chaos around Dover. Those taken to Ramsgate are being bussed to the nearby Ministry of Defence base at Manston, where part of the site is now being used as a secondary processing centre. GB News has been told Monday's total is likely to beat this year's record for the largest number of migrants arriving on a single day. That figure was reached on the 14th of April when 562 people arrived. Now, at least 600 have been taken ashore after multiple small boats were intercepted over a 10-hour period. It brings the total number of people who've crossed the English Channel in small boats this year to around 17,000. It comes as the Home Secretary is reported to be close to agreeing a controversial multi-million-pound renewal of payments to French authorities to ensure they continue to play their part in trying to stop small boats from leaving their beaches in the first place. Mark White, GB News.
So more than 600 in a day. We're getting on for 4,000. That was for last month for July. Mark White there, our Home and Security editor, with the latest punctuation mark in that story of migrants crossing in small boats across the English Channel. We'll talk to Mark in the next hour. Ella Whelan's alongside me just for her take on this story and the numbers that keep on rising inexorably. I mean, you're a Liberal on migration, aren't you? Mm-hmm. But on the migrant boats, where do you stand?
I think most people, whether you want to have a more liberal immigration system or a more conservative one, agree that people travelling in these, various sort of vehicles, from dinghies to more functional boats, is horrendous. It's dangerous. People's lives are at risk, and it's not great for lifeguard services to have to also continue to risk their lives to go out and save them. So this is not a sustainable situation. But I think it begs a bigger question about the kind of confusion around the British immigration system, asylum system, refugee system. I mean, at the moment we've just had news about Liz Truss loosening things up around migrant fruit pickers at the same time that we have quite a stringent policy in relation to the points-based system. So things feel a little confused at the moment.
Well, yeah, and we can blame politicians for that. I mean, I think one thing that's often overlooked here is just the corrosive impact of people who enter the country not in good faith, in bad faith. People are throwing their passports over the side, destroying their identity papers, pretending to be older than they actually are, claiming family groups, that they're part of family groups when they're not. Mm. As a way of introducing yourself to a country, it's a terrible foot to get off on.
Yes, and there's a reason why we have policy and legislation around illegal immigration, which is that we accept that whether you're, whether you're a Liberal on this like me or a Conservative, borders are important. Enforcing those borders are important. I think, this is just a symptom of a greater problem within the system that doesn't work. But I don't think few people would sit here and say it's a sustainable situation for people to just be turning up willy-nilly without any kind of proper process.
It may not be sustainable, but it's going to keep on growing until something really radical changes. I think that's probably reasonable to say. We've got emails coming in, not on that story, but on the Conservative leadership race. Second hustings in Exeter tonight. Today's the first day that Conservative Party members, 160,000 of them, can vote for whether they want Rishi Sunak or Liz Truss. Malcolm says neither Rishi Sunak nor Liz Truss will be in power after the next general election if they become Prime Minister. We are facing a hung Parliament with the Labour Party joining forces with the Lib Dems and the SNP, thanks to those Conservative MPs who betrayed the membership. Ian says both candidates for Prime Minister have lost the plot. Promises of 30 bob here, 10 bob there, which people have no idea if they can trust. There's no long-term plans to solve the cost of living crisis, just one sound bite after another. And Philippa, I still haven't gotten over... Surely Philippa got over... Well, she says, I still haven't gotten over the loss of Kemi Badenoch. The Conservatives have shot themselves in the foot. And Pete says, Rishi really knows how to woo the public. Firstly, he says, if prices go up, he'll reduce fuel tax. Now it's coming down, so no help there. Now he says he'll take 4p off income tax in the next 7 years. 7 years, he's having a laugh. You're with Colin Brazier on GB News, on TV, online and on digital radio. Coming up in the next few minutes, my angle today, thoughts on what makes Yorkshire the greatest county in England. Stay tuned.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know. The latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We're trying to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Think of Yorkshire and you think of what? Let's start with its people. For one thing, there are a lot of them. Yorkshire has the same population as Scotland. But what about the character of those people? What adjectives come to mind? Stoical, curmudgeonly, chippy, commonsensical, sardonic? Well, the word which most often crops up is blunt. Yorkshire folk have a habit of speaking their minds, often succinctly, for good or ill. I say all this because today is Yorkshire Day. It's not an ancient institution, this, quite a modern invention and one which has taken root. Not very scientific, but I think that Brits are increasingly keen on flying flags, and the Yorkshire flag, there it is, white rose on blue background, can often be seen run up the flagpole of a suburban garden, often gardens very far from Yorkshire itself. When I worked at the Yorkshire Post and afterwards at Yorkshire TV, the idea of a day to celebrate England's biggest county was just catching on. But though Yorkshire Day is relatively new, the idea that to be born a Yorkshireman or woman was to have won the great lottery of life is not. For centuries, Yorkshire has stood ever so slightly apart from the rest of England. Not just thanks to the Pennines, thank God, from Lancashire, the old enemy, but from everywhere else, for that matter. Where does it spring from, this mild form of tykish exceptionalism? Well, the Vikings bear a lot of responsibility. As a child growing up in Bradford, you would be told to go out and lake. Lake is the Old Norse word for play. The county's ancient subdivisions, West, North and East Ridings, come from the Scandinavian word for a third. And for anybody who thinks history doesn't matter, think on this. In medieval times, Yorkshire, thanks to wool and the abbeys, was one of Britain's most prosperous regions. Then, in 1069, William the Conqueror decided to obliterate Yorkshire for its rebelliousness, killing 100,000 in the process. It was called the Harrying of the North, and according to one recent study, the county never really recovered economically. Of course, it did become a crucible of the Industrial Revolution and many of the technological advances that made it possible. Today, for instance, is the anniversary of the chemical discovery of oxygen by Joseph Priestley, a scientist from West Yorkshire. Many of those dark satanic mills and foundries have now gone. In my native Bradford, you're more likely to see a minaret than a chimney. The county is forever changing. But in a world where regional kinks are constantly being ironed out by globalisation, Yorkshire still has something distinctive about it. You see it in the people it produces. From Bronte to Boycott, from Clarkston to Hockney, from Wilberforce to Fawkes. A certain cussedness, an unwillingness to go with the flow. We live in a time when many Brits feel huge pressure to conform, to stay tight-lipped even if the emperor has no clothes. That's not how they do things in God's own county, where a spade, more often than not, is still called a spade. Happy Yorkshire Day. Ella Whelan's not from Yorkshire, but in every other respect, she's a thoroughly decent human being. Yorkshire, you don't like days, do you?
Well, I'm very stirred by that speech, I have to say, Colin.
Should we do a rendition of Ilkley Moor Bagtat?
That was a real ode to your home place. No, I'm not that into days, but it is interesting how, as you mentioned, in a world where globalisation has become this thing that, for right or wrong, people are reacting against, I think mostly rightly. There is a focus on kind of locality. I mean, you know, David Goodhart mentions this in his kind of work around the somewheres and the anywheres. Similar conversations being had in America, where people feel very strongly, not in a kind of superficial sort of localism, but in a serious sense of place and rootedness. And I think you're tapping into something quite interesting there, which is that the more the world feels like it's happening around us or happening to us, in particular politics is happening to us, the history of places like, you know, Yorkshire, you mentioned the Dark Satanic Mills, the kind of revolts we had, you know, towards the end of the Industrial Revolution, all of that comes from a place of people being proud about where they live and wanting to change the place they live. And so, you know, whether or not we have a day for it, I think a little bit of that is in a world where things seem to float around all about us and we can sometimes feel like we don't come from anywhere, is to be celebrated.
It's important it's not done in opposition to something else. I mean, I joke about Lancashire and the rivalry and the War of the Roses and all that stuff. It used to be very serious, clearly. It's less serious now. But I sometimes reflect on that sense of national pride, say, in Scotland, and it's a wonderful thing, apart from when it's by being in opposition to England, for instance. And that's when I have a problem with it, with when pride tips over into anathema.
But you know, there is, I think you're right, but there's also, I think there can be a harmless aspect to it. So, you know, my family in Ireland from rural parts, the county Wicklow up in the mountains, we're called Culchies, and the people who are from Dublin, the town, are called Jackeens. And you can take that in a nasty way, it's sometimes meant, but also, you know, a bit of harmless poking of fun is no bad thing.
Mackems and Geordies.
Yeah.
Ella, thanks very much. It's time for our debate this hour. The Tory leadership hopeful and former Chancellor Rishi Sunak says he would introduce a £10 fine for patients who repeatedly miss GP or hospital appointments, as he pledged to cut the NHS backlog if he becomes Prime Minister. National Health Service figures from 2019 suggest more than 15 million general practice, this is just GP's appointments, 15 million GP appointments wasted each year because patients don't turn up and fail to warn surgeries that they will not be attending. Of course, you have to be able to get through to them to tell them you're not coming, not always easy, costing the health service £30 on average per missed appointment. So we're asking, should we find people who miss NHS appointments, as Rishi Sunak is suggesting? We're joined by the NHS GP, Dr Veena Babu, and the Head of Lifestyle Economics at the Institute for Economic Affairs, Christopher Snowden. Welcome to you both. Veena, if we can start with you. I mean, I know you have within general practice, I'm told, what you call heart sink patients. Your heart sinks when they walk through the door because they tend to present a lot, and oftentimes they don't need to. But at least they're turning up. How many people just don't even bother telling you they're not turning up?
Hi, Colin. Thanks for having me. Yes, there might have been a large amount, but I think the first question I'd want to kind of ask is, that data is from 2019, back when all appointments were face-to-face. So yes, there might have been a larger amount of people not turning up, but now with 50% of appointments being telephone or remote, there's a lot less scope for someone missing their appointment. And even if there is, I think you should then pose the question of why have they missed it? Are they a vulnerable person? Rather than holding accountability, I think we also have like a clinical responsibility towards the whole situation. So on this occasion, I'm not on the side of we should charge them. Yes, there should be a warning. Maybe the third account you charge them, but where does that money go? Is anyone going to see that money? You know, I have patients who are struggling to put food on the table. This is not the time to punish people. This is the time to empower people and to educate them and make them understand. So I think, yes, I see where they're coming from, but the data was from 2019, and I don't think that applies right now.
Christopher Snowdon, I mean, given we're talking about Rishi Sunak's idea, a tenner as a fine per missed appointments, given the cost of admin and all that stuff, it's not really a revenue-raising measure, this, is it? It's about deterrence.
Yeah, it is, but I don't think it goes far enough. Actually, what I would like to see is everybody paying £20. I think probably something in that region to see a GP in the first place, and you prepay that as well. So if you don't turn up, you pay the £20 either way. Because the bigger problem, which you've already alluded to, Colin, is not just people missing their appointments, as bad as that is. Although I do hear some GPs quite like it when people miss their appointments because it gives them a chance to catch up with their own little backlog on the day. But it's really people turning up for frivolous reasons. You know, if you make things free and people don't adequately value them, and so you hear stories about people turning up essentially for a chat, or maybe just to get some free paracetamol, or with really stupid conditions that they should be able to work out for themselves are going to go away on their own. So I would like people to actually value GP appointments a bit more by actually paying some of the cost out of pocket. We are paying for it anyway. I mean, whether we pay it through the tax system or out of pocket, we're all paying for it. But I think that would make the system more efficient, make people value them more, and there would probably be fewer GP appointments because people would actually think, do I really need to see a GP about this yet? Probably not.
Yeah, Veena Babu, just on that point, and I know it's extending our conversation a little bit, but that idea that if you pay for it, you're going to turn up when you need to turn up.
Yes, I agree. People do value things when they have to pay for something more. We saw that in the pandemic as well, where there was risk to people's lives and there was so much uncertainty. A&Es were empty. So it poses, where was everybody who sits there for 4 hours? Where was everyone? But what happens with that? Yes, of course, there's deterrence. But what about the vulnerable groups who can't afford it, who already think by turning up they're causing a problem? That's going to deter them even more. And when they then present, it's going to be way more complications. So on that front, I do agree. It is a deterrent, but I think we need to look at the entire economy of who we're providing this healthcare service for. It's not the well-off, comfortable patients for whom a £10 is not a big deal. It's for your average person who's really struggling and needs basic healthcare.
Christopher Snowdon, devil in the detail. I mean, in terms of how you administer this, I mean, aren't you putting into the hands of GP receptionists, essentially, a role that hitherto they've not had? They would have to determine whether somebody's got a reasonable excuse for missing their appointment or not. And as we all know, GPs receptionists, some of them are terrific and efficient and friendly. Some aren't.
Well, GP receptionists seem to have taken on a rather broader role since the pandemic anyway, of kind of checking you out and triaging and making sure whether they think that you're suitable to even see a doctor. I mean, none of this comes into it if you use my system of charging people. On the point that's been made about, what about the poorest people? I mean, obviously we're always going to get this conversation about any policy rather than looking at it from the point of view of the average person. But this would raise something like £5 or £6 billion a year if we charge people £20. And we can use that to help the vulnerable people. This could be quite a progressive system. Either we could reduce taxes on things that everybody buys, which would help people on lowest incomes most, or we could just directly add it towards benefits. So, as I say, we're paying for this one way or the other. We're already paying a vast amount of money through the NHS, through the Department of Health for this. It's a question of how we do it and how we make it more effective and efficient, and stop GPs having their time wasted, which we all know that they do on a regular basis.
Well, I think Rishi Sunak started a conversation. Where it goes anywhere is another question. Christopher Snowdon, Veena Babu, thanks both for your time. Really appreciate it. Let's reflect on this. 5 to 5. We are almost there, 15 seconds away. We're going to discuss 5 things that you might want to know about before 5 o'clock. At 5, the RAC says drivers in the UK have been given some of the least generous support when it comes to soaring fuel costs. They're making a European comparison, and they're making it despite the 5p cut in fuel duty. The report compares the tax cut to that of Germany, where fuel taxes have been cut by around 25p per litre. At 4, 28 gold medals up for grabs on day 4 of the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham, with England swimming star Adam Peaty in action. Our reporter Will Hollis is in Birmingham.
Across this square there are people milling about and enjoying what you can see and share with the 72 different nations that have come here, people from Australia, from New Zealand, those big medal-winning countries, but also the smaller nations that have maybe sent 2 or 3 different athletes, maybe a handful of their friends and family have come here to support us. But the celebration about bringing people together in this square, as well as 7 other sites across the country, across the West Midlands as well, is what's making this Commonwealth Games so special. And I think in a few years' time we're going to look back very fondly about the way that this Games has played out and about how Brummies and the world have come together here in Birmingham.
That's Will Hollis. At 3, new figures suggest half of first-time buyers rely on the so-called bank of mum and dad to get themselves on the property ladder. Savills estate agents suggest this year parents will lend over £8 billion to help children buy their first home, up some 70% on 2019. Really? At 2, today marks the annual celebration, if you didn't know already, of Yorkshire, as thousands of people celebrate the existence of the county. First celebrated in 1975 by the Yorkshire Riding Society, events will take place across the region with various landmarks flying the Yorkshire flag. And at 1, scientists have supercharged one of Earth's most powerful telescopes with new technology that will reveal how our galaxy formed. If I had £1 for every time I read an introduction that said, will reveal how our galaxy formed, we'd know by now. The William Herschel telescope in Spain will be able to survey 1,000 stars per hour until it's catalogued a total of 5 million of them. 5 things you might want to know about before 5 o'clock this afternoon. Ella Willian is alongside me. What caught your ear, Ella?
Just the story on driving and fuel taxes. I mean, one of the interesting things about, unlike other places in, particularly in Europe, actually, we've had a really sustained attack on drivers in the UK. Politically, you know, whether it's the kind of green agenda around low traffic neighbourhoods or the ULEZ zone in London and incentives to go electric, it's all really been about a narrative of driving is terrible. And so that few people talk about that, because in that context then, it's unlikely that a government's going to come along and make it easier for people to drive at a time of crisis. And I think that kind of political narrative often gets missed out.
Ella, thanks very much indeed. Much more news coming up. Stay with us here on Brazier.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know. The latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hi there and welcome to Brazier. Coming up live at 5. In a few hours' time, the two Tory hopefuls, leadership hopefuls, Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak will go head-to-head. It's the second of 12 hustings they're battling now to become our next Prime Minister. Ahead of that meeting in Exeter, both candidates have announced two major policy pledges. Rishi Sunak says he will cut the basic rate of income tax, really cut it from 20 to 16% by the end of the next Parliament, so some way off, but a big cut should he become Prime Minister. Liz Truss, meanwhile, has vowed to unleash British farming to shore up food security with a pledge to slash red tape and extend a seasonal workers scheme. Analysis and reaction to both those policies coming up. Also, our debate will ask, should Sir Keir Starmer back strike action? Reports the Labour leader is facing a funding crisis over his lack of support for union strikes, with Unite, who are one of the party's main donors, suggesting they won't give money to a party that no longer visibly supports workers. Should Labour be backing striking workers, and very visibly too? And before 6 o'clock, a break in tradition in one village, one town actually, in Aberdeenshire. For more than half a century, the townspeople of Balater have been woken at the crack of dawn by bagpipers from the local army barracks, but there have been complaints, and things are about to change. We'll have a piper in the studio, earplugs at the ready. With me for the next hour, having her say on the stories of the day, the journalist and author Ella Whelan. But first, the latest news headlines with Polly.
Good afternoon. It's just after 5 o'clock, and here are the latest news headlines on GB News. An application to delay switching off Archie Battersbee's life support treatment has failed. The Court of Appeal has given until midday tomorrow, after which the Royal London Hospital will be able to end the 12-year-old's care. He's been in a coma since April. The government referred the case back to the courts for urgent consideration following an intervention by the UN. Bart's Health NHS Trust had said his treatment would end this afternoon after a High Court ruled it was in Archie's best interests. And political leaders and dignitaries have gathered in Lisbon in County Antrim for the funeral of Lord David Trimble. The former Ulster Unionist Party leader and Nobel Peace Prize winner died last week at the age of 77 following an illness. Lord Trimble played a key role in forging the 1998 Good Friday Agreement that ended decades of conflict in Northern Ireland. Now, the Lionesses have been celebrating their historic Euro 2022 women's football win at Trafalgar Square in London, where thousands of fans have been gathering to see the winning trophy. Great atmosphere there. England's first major championship win since the 1966 World Cup. They beat Germany last night 2-1 in extra time. A record crowd of over 87,000 fans went to Wembley Stadium to watch themselves, and 17.5 million of us tuned in on our TV sets at home. Minister for Sport Nigel Huddleston believes the UK has a great chance now of hosting the Women's World Cup in 2027.
I can't speak on behalf of the Chancellor, but I think we could have a very compelling case. And of course, we're bidding already. We've got a team in place to bid for the 2028 Euros and actually a whole host of other events later on this year as well. We've got the Rugby League World Cup, we've got international gymnastics, and we're currently hosting, as I said, the Commonwealth Games. So we punch above our weight in major international sporting events, but we can do even more.
Court news now, and a 22-year-old man has appeared at Lincoln Crown Court charged with the murder of 9-year-old Lilia Valutita. She was found stabbed on a street in Boston last Thursday. Lithuanian national Davidas Skebas was arrested after the public responded to CCTV images that were released to help trace him. He'll be remanded in custody until a plea hearing in September. Politics, and both leadership candidates have made further policy announcements in a bid to shore up support. Liz Truss has vowed to remove EU red tape in an effort to improve the nation's food security. The Foreign Secretary also promised to tackle staff shortages in farming, partly caused by post-Brexit restrictions, with a short-term expansion to the seasonal workers scheme. Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, Therese Coffey, is backing Liz Truss.
Well, I think it shows that colleagues recognise that Liz is ready to lead, is trusted to deliver, and will get on with the job from day one. She's been consistent in her approach on reducing taxes for families and for businesses, and I think it's important that we get on with that, including the other policies she's announced today.
Well, for his part, Rishi Sunak has committed to taking 4p off income tax within 7 years if he becomes Prime Minister. The former Chancellor said he has a plan to cut the basic rate from 20p in the pound to 16p.
Now that bills are going to be higher than we thought, it's right that we go further. And as Prime Minister, what I'd want to do is cut VAT on energy bills to provide a little bit of extra help for people over the autumn and winter. But today I've been setting out my radical vision for where I want to take the economy after we get inflation under control. I want to cut income tax by 20%. That's one of the most far-reaching cuts to income tax that we've seen.
GB News has been told the number of small boats arriving in the UK has hit a record level, with the largest number of people crossing on a single day this year. More than 600 migrants are being processed in Kent today after the authorities seized around a dozen small boats over a 10-hour period. More than 3,500 people crossed the Channel in July, in the highest monthly total this year. Ukraine's infrastructure minister says a ship carrying grain has now left the port of Odessa for Lebanon under a safe passage agreement. It's the first vessel to depart as part of a deal to unblock Ukraine's Black Sea ports. Turkey and the United Nations came to a grain and fertiliser export agreement between Russia and Ukraine last month. Meanwhile, Russia has banned entry to 39 UK officials, including the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer and the former Prime Minister David Cameron. That's it. You're up to date on GB News. More news as it happens. Now back to Brazier.
Seven minutes past 5. You're with Brazier. Now, the leadership battle between Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss, well, it goes on today. I was going to say it was heating up. Is it heating up? Well, members of the Conservative Party can now start voting. As of today, they can start voting on who they want to be their next party leader and our next Prime Minister. They can vote online. They can fill in their ballot forms from today. And tonight, the former Chancellor and the Foreign Secretary, they'll face another one of those hustings. It's the second of a dozen of them. This time, the party members they will find in front of them are in Exeter, so it's moved to the southwest, this Conservative Party charabanc. Ahead of the event, Rishi Sunak announcing plans to cut the basic rate of income tax by 4p. Should he become Prime Minister, that would see the rate drop from 20% to 16%. Earlier today, he spoke to Conservative Party members in Dorset, where he outlined some of those plans.
Now that bills are going to be higher than we thought, it's right that we go further. And as Prime Minister, what I'd want to do is cut VAT on energy bills to provide a little bit of extra help for people over the autumn and winter. I want to cut income tax by 20%. That's one of the most far-reaching cuts to income tax that we've seen. We'll do that responsibly over time, continuing to reduce our borrowing, and we'll do it by growing the economy, taking advantage of our Brexit freedoms, and getting our businesses to invest more and innovate more through the tax reforms that I'm going to put in place.
Well, I'm very pleased to say we're joined by Elliot Keck, who's the investigations campaign manager at the Taxpayers Alliance. Elliot, welcome to you. These are good times for the Taxpayers Alliance. They're talking your language. 20% cut in income tax, in any way deliverable?
I think the key thing is you say it's a good time for Taxpayers Alliance, but it will only be a good time for taxpayers when these words are put into action. This is a very, very far-reaching measure. It's one we absolutely support, but there's a couple of key problems with the policy. Firstly, it's not until 2029. There's a cost of living crisis now. People need more money in their pay packets. And the other thing is we've actually done modelling that has just come out in the last 15, 20 minutes or so that shows how much the tax changes will be weighed down by the national insurance increase. So according to our modelling, after 10 years, a 4p cut to income tax would increase the economy by £11 billion. not bad. If you also scrap the national insurance rise, that would go up to £38 billion.
And is that because NI is a tax on job creation?
That's one of the key problems with it. So people often think about NI as that extra 1.25% on the consumer and the worker, but actually it's also a tax on employers, and that's why it's so damaging to
a nasty little tax.
It really is, yeah.
But are you pleased about the fact that just in terms of I was going to call it the public debate, it's not really a public debate, it's quite a narrow debate amongst 160,000 Conservative Party members and the two people who want to be Prime Minister. Nonetheless, open the newspapers, news websites, news channels, it's tax cuts are on the agenda, one way or another.
Yeah, they are, you're absolutely right, and that's obviously good news, but we've heard the rhetoric before, and that rhetoric has led to a 70-year tax high, so we really need to see the words turned into action.
Are they making the moral case for tax cuts? Is there a moral case for tax cuts? I'm going to ask Ella Whelan about this in just a second, who may demur, but is there one that you can make?
Yeah, the moral case is clear. People spend money better than the government, and of course there's some things that the government should provide, absolutely, but as a general rule of thumb, people spend money better than the government.
Yeah. Ella Whelan, one of my bugbears is people talking about government money. Mm-hmm. The government doesn't have money, does it? It doesn't really have money. They have our money. We have taxpayers' money. But, people now increasingly talk about government money as if it's money the government's created. The government can't create money unless it prints it.
Well, another way of looking at it, I suppose, would be that, some of us have always interpreted tax as a tax on the capitalist class because it never reaches our pockets. You don't get to say, yes, I'm going to give this over. If you don't give this over, you can, there are serious consequences. It's been very interesting listening to Elliot. I'm going to upset him by saying I want to hear...
He's not easily upset.
I'm going to say I want to hear less about tax because as much as it's a fundamental thing, an important point, talking about tax before talking about production is pointless. In fact, Phil Mullen in Spiked, online economist writing for Spiked this week, has said it's like going to a water fight with a little pistol. It's really pointless. Rishi Sunak talking about, his great plan for the economy and trying to announce this huge thing, and then it's related to tax, shows you the kind of deep issue with all politicians at this point being able to look at the bigger picture in relation to the British economy, which is that whether or not this particular policy is only going to, if it's delayed, going to come in 2029, there is more fundamental questions about how the production in this country is dealt with, how wealth production is dealt with. What are kind of the R&D innovations, investment in businesses, all that kind of stuff. I've had nothing about that from Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak. It's all been a question of timing. Who's going to cut tax now? Who's going to cut tax later? And there won't be any kind of substantial benefits for the economy in relation to those policies.
Elliot, I don't want to put words into your mouth, but I'm guessing you would say if you let people keep more of their money, they will make us infinitesimally large number of spending decisions that will reallocate resources within an economy. And if they reallocate them towards things where productivity is a priority and where R&D is a priority, then there's more money going on those things.
Yeah, I think
and the invisible hand, as Adam Smith talked about, starts to assert itself.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely spot on. It's absolutely right. Ala's right that we need to increase production in this country, but that also means that we need to put more money back in the hands of consumers, workers, and also businesses, because ultimately, the government does have a role in some research and development, but really it's the businesses of this country and businesses of other countries looking to invest that will really drive that productivity. And if you keep on doing things like hiking up corporation tax, increasing national insurance on companies, then you're never going to get to that promised land.
Yeah. Was it Adam Smith who talked about the invisible hand?
It was, that's spot on.
Just straight off the hoof. Elliot, thanks for coming in, really appreciate it. Thanks very much indeed. So we've got one contender talking about lowering tax, Rishi Sunak focusing on tax. But look at these pictures. It's harvest time in Lincolnshire and elsewhere. They're getting the spuds in and other vegetables. Are we into the harvest season? Yes, we are. If you've seen the combines in the fields, you'll know that these are busy days for many, many farmers. And Liz Truss has vowed to remove what she calls onerous EU regulations on British farmers in a bid to improve the UK's food security. She's invoked that problem, food security. The Foreign Secretary has pledged to tackle labour shortages too if she wins the keys to number 10 by introducing a short-term expansion to the seasonal worker scheme. The programme was originally launched in 2019 and allowed 40,000 overseas workers to enter the UK for seasonal roles in things like horticulture and poultry. Let's turn to Jamie Blackett, who's a farmer and columnist based in the Scottish borders. Jamie, welcome to you and appreciate your time. These are busy times for farmers, obviously, with the harvest going on all around us. But the mere fact this is on the agenda, Liz Truss is flagging this up as a policy objective, will give you cheer, I imagine.
Yes, I think farmers should be cheerful that we have a choice now of two candidates, both of whom have rural constituencies and actually have quite a good understanding of agriculture compared to most MPs. I think I'd probably favour Liz Truss at the moment. I think she probably is speaking the right sort of language. I think Rishi Sunak is slightly too much Davos man for me, and I sort of slightly fear the globalist agenda there, whereas I think Liz Truss is more likely to go for something more homegrown. And it's great to hear them actually talking about food security. I mean, before the wake-up call we had with COVID and then with Ukraine, nobody in Whitehall was talking about food security. In fact, quite the reverse. They thought that some people were saying we didn't really need an agricultural base in this country at all, that we could just buy our food off the peg from wherever it's cheapest in the world. So very encouraging to hear her talking in that language. And also in terms of deregulation. I mean, I think we now have an opportunity to not have a great reset. I think that's probably the last thing we need, but a good reset of agricultural policy and, dare I say, a bit of a clear out of some of Boris Johnson's woke friends in Number 10 who didn't really understand agriculture and were talking the language of wilding rather than feeding the nation. And I think Liz Truss has hit on the number one problem that at the moment that the NFU would I know have raised about shortage of labour, and we've found it very difficult on my farm. We're arable and dairy, very difficult to find people to milk cows and join our team. We have actually just employed a couple of people in the last couple of weeks, but it took us several months to find anybody.
And just on labour, I mean, obviously, I know you've moved more into dairy, haven't you? Which is compared, not that labour intensive compared to something like, horticulture, where people have got to gather in literally got to gather in the crops from the fields. But I mean, it always strikes me as very odd that more people aren't interested, and particularly even sort of middle-aged and older people. If you're offering them accommodation in a lovely part of the world, a living wage and a chance to do something which nourishes the soul as well as the supermarket food aisles, then why not?
Well, absolutely, and in fact, we offer well above the living age. I think we're offering about sort of $15,000 a year for the sort of entry level job at the bottom, with the opportunity to progress to earning, sort of 80, 100,000 a year as a manager of a dairy, really quite rapidly in your 20s. And I'm astonished that more people don't want to go into agriculture. I think it's partly that the education system has conditioned people to think that agriculture in this country doesn't have much of a future, which is very sad, because it is one thing that we can be absolutely certain that we need and will always need to feed ourselves. And so it's great to hear Liz Truss engaging with agriculture and actually saying it is one of her priorities. She was DEFRA secretary. I don't think she was actually a particularly distinguished one, but she did learn about agriculture from a position of no knowledge. And so she does have the knowledge now to take on this green blob in Whitehall and get things done and deregulate agriculture. I mean, one of the frustrations is that many of us actually have grasped the nettle and embraced greener methods of agriculture, regenerative agriculture, and the Whitehall is actually rather lagging behind us, I think, actually, in grasping the opportunities. And I hope that they actually do that. And do what's necessary, really, which is to link up the consumer with what's going on in the field, so that consumers actually have a choice. At the moment, all of our milk from a grass-fed dairy herd just gets mixed up with milk from factory farms where cows are inside, and there's no distinction between free-range milk, for example, and milk that's come out of cows that
Jamie Blackett, that's something
that could be done.
We'll set that aside. That's a bigger topic altogether, one we can hopefully explore at another occasion. But really appreciate your time today. Thanks very much indeed. Jamie Blackett there joining us from the Solway Firth. Ella Whelan's alongside me to reflect on farming emerging, I think it's fair to say, not necessarily as part of the culture wars. I think you can make the argument for that, but certainly of more political relevance than it has done for years.
Well, certainly the focus, as Jamie was talking about, the focus on rewilding and this real pet project that Boris Johnson had within his government, whether that was influenced by his wife or not, who knows, but this kind of green agenda, which really, which was basically saying that it came to the point in which if you have a working farm and you're not rewilding, a significant percentage of it, you're a villain against you're a terrible person, it was just flew in the face of any sense of a future of food security. And it was fascinating, actually, the insight that he had about the differences between Truss and Sunak. We heard Tom Harwood at the top of this show saying that Sunak was sort of slating Liz Truss for being the Remainer around these policies around migrant labour. But actually, Rishi Sunak really has that feel of the kind of the globalist politician who has no sense of...
And yet you read...
And he was the Brexiteer.
He's the, North Yorkshire MP, Richmond, and he talks to farmers, he knows, and the farmers, it's reported, like him. He gets the thing. Just on offsetting, by the way, I was on a plane last night, and they said, we're a carbon neutral... I won't mention the airline concern. We're carbon neutral. I thought, I bet you are. You're carbon neutral because you're offsetting your carbon by buying up farms in mid-Wales and planting trees. Great for your reputation, so you can tell your passengers you're carbon neutral. Not so good if you're a farmer in mid-Wales or the Scottish Borders or North Yorkshire, wherever you are, and you want to buy a farm or keep a farm in the family.
Not at all. And not so good for trees either. I mean, I get this in my ear all the time from my tree surgeon, Hubson. Simply flinging trees in certain parts of the country doesn't work for the environment. It doesn't work for agriculture either.
OK, Ella, thanks very much indeed. Now, GB News has been told that the number of people pulled off small boats in the English Channel today is likely to have surpassed this year's record. It's understood more than 600 people have been brought ashore in Kent after around a dozen small boats were intercepted by the Border Force, lifeboats and the Royal Navy throughout the course of the day. Our Home and Security editor, Mark White, has more.
At the entrance to Ramsgate Harbour, two Border Force vessels, the catamarans Typhoon and Volunteer, have arrived together to unload dozens of people pulled from small boats in the middle of the Channel. Since first light, Border Force, lifeboats and the Royal Navy have been responding to multiple reports of small boats crossing into UK waters. For the past week, Border Force has been using Ramsgate as an alternative landing spot for Channel migrants because of the traffic chaos around Dover. Those taken to Ramsgate are being bussed to the nearby Ministry of Defence base at Manston, where part of the site is now being used as a secondary processing centre. GB News has been told Monday's total is likely to beat this year's record for the largest number of migrants arriving on a single day. That figure was reached on the 14th of April when 562 people arrived. Now, at least 600 have been taken ashore after multiple small boats were intercepted over a 10-hour period. It brings the total number of people who've crossed the English Channel in small boats this year to around 17,000. It comes as the Home Secretary is reported to be close to agreeing a controversial multi-million-pound renewal of payments to French authorities to ensure they continue to play their part in trying to stop small boats from leaving their beaches in the first place. Mark White, GB News.
Mark is here in the studio to reflect on this one. The numbers keep rising inexorably. Mark, what to do?
Yeah, and as we speak, there's another sighting of a small boat. It's heading from the French side of the Channel towards the English side. It's about to make that sort of crossing point, and once it does get into UK waters, then it will be picked up by, there's a Border Force vessel just waiting on the line for it now, and so we'll be over 600 then that have come across in one day. As I say, this is now the record for this year, and we did notice actually for a few weeks numbers weren't as high as we were expecting now that we're in the summer, but I think that was possibly down to the fact that you'll remember just a few weeks back there was a very big international operation that targeted people smugglers, those who were supplying the boats. And the National Crime Agency, who were leading that operation, said that you will notice, for the short term at least, an impact because they won't have the same supply of boats. Well, it looks like the people smugglers, with their multi-million pounds trade, too valuable not to continue with that trade, have managed to get more boats from a different supplier.
Is there anything really radical, Mark? I mean, heavens above, we've got Rwanda. How much more radical a plan can you get? But, I mean, you can see why whoever is the next Prime Minister wants to make an instant impression, not least of the people that put them there. Is there something that we're missing? Is there a plan that Rishi Sunak or Liz Truss could really go with to deal with the Channel migrant crisis?
Well, I mean, the Rwanda plan would work if it was ever allowed to succeed by the courts, and if they sent effectively every single person that came across, they said you're going to Rwanda, then it would be a disincentive, wouldn't it? If you think you're coming across to be sent to Rwanda, it could probably work. But it's not practical for so many different reasons. The only real way of stopping them coming across is to get the French on board in a way that they're not thus far, to stop them all, to flood those beaches with more security personnel, to stop the boats going off in the first place. And they're doing it, but not to the extent that it will have any meaningful impact on the overall numbers.
We'll just send 500 security guards with needles to puncture boats. I mean, I know it's a silly suggestion, but do you know what I mean?
But it's not as silly as you think. Just armed with some kind of sharp implement, enough numbers on the beach so that if they were to get attacked, they would have enough personnel to deal with it. And then you just go along and you puncture these inflatables so that they can't put to the water in the first place. But, it's a massive job. You would have to commit to it for a period of time in order to smash the people smugglers model for them not to consider doing it.
I'll tell you what, Mark, I think there's volunteers aplenty right now in Kent. Thank you very much indeed.
Don't suggest that, please.
No, definitely not suggesting that. Coming up, last week it was announced that the Tavistock Clinic, the Gender Identity Development Service, will close from next spring. Writing in The Telegraph today, the columnist Tim Stanley has asked if and when what he calls the trans revolution will end. That's next.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GBNews, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
It's 5:30, you're watching GB News and the latest top story. An application to delay switching off Archie Battersbee's life support treatment has failed. The Court of Appeal has given until midday tomorrow, after which the Royal London Hospital will be able to end the 12-year-old's treatment. He's been in a coma since April. The government had referred the case back to the courts for urgent consideration following an intervention by the UN. Bart's Health NHS Trust had said his treatment would end this afternoon after a High Court ruled it was in Archie's best interests. Political leaders and dignitaries have gathered in Lisbon, in County Antrim, for the funeral of Lord David Trimble. The former Ulster Unionist Party leader and Nobel Peace Prize winner died last week at the age of 77, following an illness. Lord Trimble played a key role in forging the 1998 Good Friday Agreement that ended decades of conflict in Northern Ireland. And in happier news today, fans have been gathering at London's Trafalgar Square for the Lionesses' historic Euro 2022 win. It's England's first major football championship win since the 1966 World Cup, beating Germany 2-1 in extra time last night. A record crowd of over 87,000 came to Wembley Stadium to watch last night. 17.5 million people tuned in on their TV sets at home. The Minister for Sport, Nigel Huddleston, saying he now believes the UK has a great chance of hosting the Women's World Cup in 2027.
I can't speak on behalf of the Chancellor, but I think we could have a very compelling case. And of course, you know, we're bidding already. We've got a team in place to bid for the 2028 Euros and actually a whole host of other events later on this year as well. We've got the Rugby League World Cup, we've got international gymnastics, you know, and we're currently hosting, as I said, the Commonwealth Games. So we punch above our weight in major international sporting events, but we can do even more.
And as you've been hearing, GB News has been told the number of small boats arriving in the UK has hit a record level, with the largest number of people crossing on a single day this year. More than 600 migrants are being processed in Kent as a result today, after authorities seized around a dozen small boats over a 10-hour period. More than 3,500 people crossed the Channel in July, in the highest monthly figure this year. Those are the headlines. You're up to date on TV, online and on your radio via DAB+. You're with GB News, where now it's time to go back to Brazier.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Right after a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound is 1.228 to the dollar. The pound is 1.195 to the euro. And if you'd like to buy an ounce of gold, you'll have to fork out £1,440 and 51 pence.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
Now, a story we focused on a lot last week, and I think arguably we could still focus on it quite a bit more. And it's a story about the Tavistock Clinic, the Gender Identity Development Service for treating children with gender distress, is to close from next spring. It's after a report, highly critical report, found multiple failings affecting thousands of children that have been treated at the centre. The independent report, being led by Dr. Hilary Cass, found there had been little consideration amongst clinicians there. In today's Telegraph, the columnist Tim Stanley has asked when what he calls the trans revolution will end. Always worth reading Tim Stanley. That's a particularly thought-provoking column. He joins us now to ponder on some of the arguments he's getting across. Tim Stanley, welcome to you. There's a lot in that column today, and it's very sweeping, and it takes, I don't mean that unkindly, I mean, as in it takes in a lot of different themes. I'm going to just repeat one of the lines in it. You say this incredibly naive view of children who, if they're not being shaped by responsible adults, will take their cues from popular culture, or worse, each other. So part of the problem, as you describe it, is this sort of corrosion of parental authority, or the ability for the grown-ups to deal with big stuff like this.
Absolutely. What I argue is that the trans revolution is not a detour in the history of our politics. It's not something that we've accidentally done and we can easily back out of. I'm saying it's the culmination of a number of revolutions since the 1960s. Gender, sexuality, and also a new attitude towards children. The idea that kids are not just mini versions of their parents, but they're autonomous human beings who have the right to define themselves, decide their own future, even, in a sense, to teach themselves. And when that becomes embedded in an educational system, and then there's an outbreak of a kind of groupthink, which you get with gender fluidity and trans issues, and children start saying to adults, I am not the sex that you say I am, it becomes difficult for adults to say no, because the weight of the culture and the education system is towards taking kids at face value and affirming the way that kids see themselves. So I see what we're going through as a legacy of the slow erosion of parental authority.
Tim, when I have this conversation, you know, I've had it several times over the course of the last year with my teenage children, who'll say, Dad, if you don't go along with this and somebody is in a really bad place, what if they do kill themselves? If you deny them the transition they yearn for, and which is clinically approved, that's the risk you run, they say. What should I say to them?
Well, you could point them towards the Cass review of what was going on at the Tavistock Clinic. Now, what campaigners who are opposed to Tavistock infer from the Cass review is that it was taking a large number of kids who probably had a wide variety of problems that would have gone from autism to depression to confusion to being a sexuality that they were frightened of and didn't know how to process. They took a wide number of kids, and they may allegedly have encouraged them down one particular pathway to affirm the current cultural thing of saying, if you feel uncomfortable with your body, perhaps you need to change your body. So you need to step back from all of that and say, okay, I'm not dismissing gender dysphoria. I'm not dismissing the possibility that you're in the wrong body, but I want to explore a wide range of other options for what could be wrong with you. If you don't do that and you follow this terrible medical jargon, but you follow this pathway towards gender transition, it's possible that you could end up doing something that causes long-term, irreversible harm that will also harm the mental health of that vulnerable young person. So I would just say this is not about limiting choices for young people. It's not about not listening to them. It's the very opposite of that. It's about expanding their choices, listening to them, and helping them, again, another horrible medical word, in a holistic manner by addressing everything that could be wrong with them, situational, mental, physical, and not just one thing.
Tim Stanley, hold that thought for a second. I've got Ella Whelan here in the studio with me. Ella.
Tim raises a really important point, which is the sort of longevity of the way in which we've talked about kids and adults, and the problem with, that it hasn't just fallen from the sky. This, quite shocking trend, particularly among young people, particularly among young girls, of wanting to change, the very fundamental fact of who they are and what sex they are. There was a really interesting insight into this with the Stonewall got into trouble last week for tweeting about the fact that there was that children as young as 2 could transition and understand the language of gender ideology. They got in trouble with that on Twitter, and then they released a clarifying statement. And actually, within that clarifying statement, they said, yes, OK, maybe we were wrong on that, and we don't do work in nursery education. But actually, we believe that children should be free to learn and experience the world and explore the world, free from adults imposing their views upon them. Now, that is fundamentally misunderstood. I mean, the kids are in nursery, they're having adult views imposed upon them. But it's fun. It's actually a really dangerous misunderstanding about child development and the difference between children and adults. I think this is something that Tim's really hit upon, which is that we've completely broken down the boundary between adults who know things and children who don't yet know things. And the safety implications there, if you break down that boundary, are really frightening, because what you end up having is kids not believing that their parents have their best, the best at heart for them. I mean, there are a very few parents who probably are unable to cope with their kids' gender dysphoria. It's actually an interesting fact that the Tavistock used to use the language of gender dysphoria, now it uses the language of gender development, which in itself is a political shift. But the vast majority of parents, as Tim say, want to have all choices option, and at the end of the day want to have a happy kid. If a child doesn't believe that their parents know best, that leads to some very dark outcomes.
Tim, final thought from you.
Very often what's happening here is actually adults who mean well are imposing their view of the world upon children who are going through something confusing. What I don't understand is why so many adults, particularly people who call themselves professionals when it comes to childcare, have forgotten what it's like to be a child. It's frightening and confusing for everyone going through adolescence. Everyone needs the help of others. But to forget that and try to impose upon it one political reading of what they're going through is itself a form of trying to control a child's development. And I'm just amazed that professionals can't see they're doing it.
Tim Stanley, Ella Whelan, thanks both. Coming up, for more than half a century, the townspeople of Balater in Aberdeenshire have been woken up at the crack of dawn by a bagpiper from the local army barracks, the Victoria Barracks. There have been complaints, and things are going to change. We'll be joined in the studio by a bagpiper. Back in a moment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know. The latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Our debate this hour, one of Labour's main financial backers has threatened to withdraw funding over Keir Starmer's stance on the rail strikes. Unite Union's General Secretary Sharon Graham said, quote, "There is no point giving money to a party that is basically sticking two fingers up to workers." She also criticised the sacking of the Shadow Transport Minister Sam Tarry during last week's strike. There he is. We're asking, should Keir Starmer visibly back the rail strikes, or should he stick to what has been a pretty strong disciplinary line so far. We're joined by the former Labour Shadow Minister, Stephen Pound, and the Socialist Party Industrial Organiser, Rob Williams, who take different positions on this, I think that's probably fair to say. Stephen Pound, to you first. A party of protest, it mustn't just be a party of protest, clearly, but protest is part of what parties do.
Well, absolutely, no problem here. Look, as Keir's just announced this afternoon, it's perfectly possible for people to go and join on picket lines, but the reality of the situation is that you cannot say that the Labour Party is purely there to represent unconditionally the sectional interests of a tiny proportion, less than 23% of the working population, and an even smaller population of a percentage of the national population. Look, when the Labour Party was formed, trade unions were illegal, in effect. You know, the Taff Vale judgment meant that if you went on strike, you had to pay the bosses all the money. The Labour Party is here to actually represent and to speak for all the people of the country. Trade unions, and I've been a trade unionist every day of my working life, they are there to advance the interests and protect the interests of their members. Absolutely right. The Labour Party is a government in waiting here to represent everybody in this country. About 90% of the country reckon that they are members of the working class. They are workers. So you can have every single Labour MP rock up on the picket line tomorrow. They'll all feel very good about it. They can all hug themselves. They'll all send each other little selfies about it. It won't make a blind bit of difference. This last week, the Tory government had to change the law on allowing agency workers to actually come in and cover for strikes. That legislation was brought in by Tony Blair and by the Labour government, just as we brought in the legislation to allow compulsory workplace recognition of trade unions. The Labour Party and the trade unions work together as partners. It is not a question of them cracking the whip because they give us a lot of money. You simply say, otherwise, why do the British Medical Association, the Royal College of Nurses, the biggest unions in this country after Unite, we don't expect them to snap their fingers and we jump. We represent the nation. We don't just represent, we respect the unions and we admire the unions and we have a great attachment to as they are the progenitors of the Labour Party. But ultimately, we're a government in waiting and we represent everybody in this country, not just the RMT.
Rob Williams, if Stephen Pound is right, and we are talking about a Labour Party that is a government in waiting and has to be taken seriously and behave in a sober, serious way, you can't possibly allow a front bench spokesman, the transport spokesman in this case, to go rogue in the way he did, giving interviews off the hoof in defiance of the line from the leader's office.
Well, first of all, as you can see from my sticker, I was on the picket line this morning with BT workers, and they, like all the other workers who've been on strike in the last few days, are shocked. See, Stephen mentioned there about what the Tory government did, and I agree, bringing in ever more strike-breaking legislation. But of course, what workers are saying is, well, the Tories represent their class very well, but Keir Starmer, who does he represent? Because he's not representing the interests of workers. He's rowing back on the policies that we had. He's rowing back on nationalisation. He's not in reality supporting the workers in their battle for a pay rise that they need to keep theirs and their families' heads above water. And it is an absolute outrage. I mean, the clue is in the name, isn't it? It's supposed to be the Labour Party. Stephen said himself, the Labour Party was created by the trade unions. And what we have at the moment is workers with inflation nearly 12%, employers imposing pay rises that would in reality mean massive cuts in their living standards. They look around for solidarity, and I tell you what, they're going to have to keep looking because Keir Starmer's not there. And what this is about is that Keir Starmer is telling the establishment, I'm safe for you. I am safe. This isn't about what, he's trying to, if you like, make a difference between what Jeremy Corbyn was about. Jeremy would be on picket lines, but Jeremy would also be supporting policies that represented and defended the interests of working class people.
But I'm sure Rob Williams, it's escaped nobody's notice, has it? But Rob, I mean, I'm not putting words into Stephen Pound's mouth, I'm sure, but I'm sure he's on the point of pointing out that, Corbynomics left you with an 80-seat deficit come the general election. So that middle way you describe is the way you win power, and serious parties want to win power, don't they? Stephen Pound, just very, very briefly, it's a broken model, isn't it? If you take union money, you are to some degree beholden to represent their values.
Well, no, there's a lot of unions who don't give us any money. A lot of unions, like the RMT, that stand against us. They actually support people standing against the Labour Party. So that puts us in a slightly difficult position there. We're not in the pockets of the oligarchs and the bosses like the Tory party. There's no question. But what I'd like to do is to actually take this beyond the idea of a few people striking into pompous poses on picket lines and actually say, look, the real problem here is that the energy companies, the utilities are making ludicrous, obscene amounts of profit. One of the reasons why people want a pay rise, why they need a pay rise, why they have to have a pay rise, is because of the cost of living, the cost of energy. Drag the money back from those people, those bloated plutocrats.
I'm going to cut in there. Sorry, Stephen, we've got to crack on. Stephen Pound and Rob Williams.
I'll with Rob on that.
Thanks for your time. Thanks, guys. Got to go.
The nationalisation of the energy companies, then, shouldn't you? And Keir Starmer,
no argument, mate.
on that.
No
Guys,
argument.
We'll finish it some other time. Thanks very much indeed. We're moving on to this item. Bagpipers from the Royal Regiment of Scotland have been forced to delay their dawn bagpiping, is that really a verb, from 6 to 7 a.m. Weekdays after receiving complaints, it's been reported, from some residents for more than at least half a century. The townsfolk of Balater, lovely town, if you know it, in Aberdeenshire, have been sometimes woken by bagpipers from the local Victoria Army barracks. Well, you have to imagine what the barracks look like. We're showing you somebody piping on Westminster Bridge, a long way away from Aberdeenshire. Anyway, residents have been speculating that complaints about the morning ritual came from perhaps holidaymakers or second home owners. We don't know. That's conjecture. Let's turn to one bagpiper, Chick Mackey. Welcome to you, and we appreciate you coming in. Rituals are important where bagpiping's concerned, aren't they? The morning reveille and all that stuff.
Well, I was a piper in the Black Watch for many years. I joined the army as a boy, and of course, piping, reveille, is one of the most important events of the day because it wakes all the troops.
Yeah. So it wasn't. I mean, back in the day, it performed a genuine function. Get out of bed, lads, and get ready for action.
Oh yes. I mean, the tune that all Scottish Highland regiments are woken up to is a tune called "Hey Johnny Cope," which is quite a very difficult tune, and especially at 6 o'clock or 6:30 in the morning. But it's a lovely tune, and that dates back to the 1745 rebellion, dare I say.
You're very welcome to say it.
I want to leave here with my head.
What respect? I mean, I love. Ella, you a fan of the bagpipes? Yeah, me too. And I find the idea that people take umbrage to it, even going off early, strange. But I mean, do you get people when you as you were practicing when you were younger? I mean, did it rub some people the wrong way?
Most definitely when I was in the military. Because once again, the point of a duty of bagpipe is to wake people up in the morning.
Yeah.
And not only that, it goes beyond that because you play for dinner call, you play for the evening retreat, and you actually play them to bed with the sleep call, with a tune called "Sleep Dearie Sleep." The practicing will wind troops up, of course. Just don't ask my neighbours. Hi, neighbours. I know the work.
What's your favourite tune?
I'm going to say what my father said. They're all my favourite tunes. I like the tune I'm going to play just now. It's called "Johnny Cope," Reveille, which I think I'm going to play for you.
Fantastic. Please do. Please do. Yeah. Okay. We'll give you about a minute before our next guest comes in.
I'm good at that.
Okay.
Time exactly.
Yeah.
And if I stop tuning, it's because I've forgotten the tune, but I'm sure that won't. Over there?
Yes, please. Fantastic. There's so much dexterity. It's amazing. Chick, thanks so much for coming in. You don't do Oakley Moor by tat, do you?
You want it?
Well, maybe. Just to hold fire. And I say that because today is Yorkshire Day, as I'm sure you're aware. Well, maybe. Just can we keep you on what's known as standby in the industry? Just hold that position for 2 minutes, if you would. Michelle Dewberry is in another part of the studio to reflect on Yorkshire Day. Michelle?
Happy Yorkshire Day. I tell you, that is the saying that I hear the most. I'm here, got my Yorkshire flat cap. I've got one of my favourite parts of Yorkshire with me. If you are a Hull person or if you've ever been to Hull, you'll know what this is. I'm holding chip spice. Do you know what chip spice is, Colin?
No.
You've not lived, I can tell you. It's one of the finest inventions known to mankind. Put a bit of that on your chips and off you go. But yes, happy Yorkshire folk to all my fellow Yorkshire people. I've got to say, coming up on my show tonight, oh, look at my hair. You see, Colin, this is why flat caps. They don't really, they're much better for you men, I think. Anyway, coming up on my show tonight, I'll be celebrating the Lionesses. What a victory. Is it really, though, going to be a turnaround for women's sport or not? Is it something people even care about enough? So I want to get into that. Also, sticking with football as well, taking the knee. There's a debate about whether or not that should continue, yes or no. Death penalty. Is it time for that to return when you think about people like Wayne Couzens and immigration as well?
Brilliant. Michelle, you're going to sing along to Ilkley Moor by Tat.
I'm going to go brush my hair before I do my show.
Stand by.
Hi there, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. Dry and bright out there for many of us this afternoon, but it is going to turn cloudy with rain for many, especially northern and central areas overnight. And it will stay, once again, driest towards the south. At the moment, an area of high pressure is stretching towards the UK from the southwest, but a number of weather fronts are coming in over the top of that high. They are now starting to bring rain to Northern Ireland, Western Scotland, and overnight we'll see that rain spread into the rest of Scotland, Northern England, parts of North and West Wales as well. The further south you are, the more that rain will be on and off and lighter. The far south and southeast tending to stay dry with some clear spells, but elsewhere a lot of cloud cover, increasingly breezy, spells of rain and mild, 17 or 18 Celsius by dawn in many places. The rain, though, will be heavy.